Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Matthew Jane, and I'm the Learning and Engagement Manager for the State Historical Society of Iowa. The Iowa History 101 webinars, presented on the second and fourth Thursdays of each month, explore Iowa's history from pre-statehood to current day. You can learn more about this series and all of our programs on our website at history.iowa.gov. Please remember to sign up for each webinar you'd like to attend, and don't worry if you can't watch live, all presentations will be recorded. Now, a few housekeeping points before I introduce our speaker today. Everyone came into this webinar on mute with cameras off. Closed captions are available by clicking the closed caption button on your screen. The webinar is being recorded and will be placed on the Iowa History page of YouTube in just a few days. I have disabled the chat function, but if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. My colleague Andrew Klump is watching that feature and will prepare a list of questions for a speaker at the end of the presentation. But please note we may not be able to get to all the questions. And also, a few days following the program, a thank you email will be sent out, which includes a list of additional readings and resources discussed today. And now I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, Megan Bannister. Megan Bannister is an Iowa transplant who has called the Hawkeye State home for more than 15 years. An avid road tripper, Megan writes about offbeat destinations, roadside attractions, and world's largest things. She is the author of Secret Iowa, a guide to the weird, wonderful, and obscure, as well as Iowa Supper Clubs, which highlights classic restaurants both past and present across the state. And you can learn about Iowa Supper Clubs in a past 101 presentation as well. And now I'm happy to turn over to Megan to begin the webinar.
Thanks so much, Matthew. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for being here today. I'm excited to get to share some weird, wonderful, and obscure things from all over the state with you. Like Matthew said, my name is Megan. I am an Iowa transplant, originally from the Chicagoland area, because that is always a question I get, who moved here more than 15 years ago and has just really fallen in love with Iowa and some of the weird and wacky things that make our state so great. So I am going to get started by reading you the intro of my book, and then we will talk about a couple weird, a couple wonderful, and a couple obscure things that you can get in the car and go visit for yourself. I truly believe that boredom is in the eye of the beholder. Whenever someone questions why I'm bothering to visit their small town or complains that there's nothing to do where they live, I'm reminded that finding something interesting is all a matter of perspective. Most often, we're bored because we're not being curious enough. Maybe we're not looking deeply enough into the places we pass every day, or more closely examining the traditions that have started to feel mundane. If we just asked, we could discover something new. Like, what was the Midwest equivalent of the gold rush? Where did artist Grant Wood create some of his most famous pieces? And what animal did 15,000 children help buy for the Iowa State Fair? Or maybe we're not asking ourselves the engagingly weird questions, like, does Iowa have its own cryptid? How did a town in northern Iowa end up with its own Blarney Stone? And is there anyone buried in the to scale replica of the Great Pyramid of Giza? As an Iowan by choice, I've spent the past 15 years and counting approaching my new home state with wonder and a sometimes skeptical curiosity. Above all else, I've never assumed that because a place is off the beaten path, there's nothing to do there. So far, it's led me to some pretty extraordinary places. Through Secret Iowa, I'll take you along with me on the search for some of the state's most unique spots. We'll bump along the back roads and even traverse a level B road or two to discover the state's weirdest and most wonderful hidden gems. Together, we'll delve deeper into the people and stories that made some of Iowa's most iconic places what they are today, and we'll uncover the history of Iowans who haven't gotten their due. Plus, each of these stories is tied to an existing place that you can read about and then hit the road to experience for yourself. So, like Matthew mentioned, I am an Iowa transplant. I moved here to go to Drake University. I have a journalism degree. And when I moved to Iowa, I started kind of getting in the car on weekends with friends to just explore and pick a direction and see what we found. And so when I was approached with the opportunity to write this book, I already had a pretty good list of places that I wanted to potentially include. One of the things that was both kind of nice and also a challenge with this project is that Secret Iowa is part of a series that this publisher does. And so there are other secret books out in the world. There is a Secret Kansas and a Secret Wisconsin. I think there's even a Secret Route 66. And so there was sort of a set format for some of the places that were included. Um, I could only have 84 spots listed in the book. They all have a pretty set format, you can kind of see here, of a two-page spread. And so there was sort of a limited amount of information I could include. And then I wanted to make sure that they were all sort of geographically distributed. So there wasn't, a concentration really heavily in central Iowa where I'm based, but that there was a good amount of places around the state that folks could go and explore. And so it has been fun as I've talked to people and started kind of gathering information for this project. I would reach out and I would say, hi, my name is Megan. I'm working on this project and this is what it's called. And when people would see the subtitle, A Guide to the Weird, Wonderful, and Obscure, I would get emails back from tourism folks and museums and things that said, "Well, I hope our place isn't on the weird section." And I would tell them, "No, no, it's wonderful." That's not how the book is set up, but it's been really fun when I've done different presentations and talks like this to get to talk about a couple weird, a couple wonderful, and a couple obscure spots around the state as sort of a way to give you a little taste of the 84 places that are included in the book. And so the first that we're going to talk about here is one of my personal favorites. It's the world's largest popcorn ball in Sac City. This is also one that sometimes folks will ask me, what's the grossest thing in the book? Or are there any, foods in the book? And this is certainly one of them. And so the world's largest popcorn ball that you can go visit today was created in 2016, but it actually is not Sac City's first world's largest popcorn ball, or even their second. So they first started creating world's largest popcorn balls in Sac City in the mid 1990s. Obviously, Iowa is known for its corn production, but that part of the state in particular in Northwest Iowa is really known for growing a lot of corn, specifically for popcorn. They have a lot of popcorn producers in the area. And so in the mid 90s, some of the members of the community and the tourism um, office there wanted to find a way to pay tribute to that unique part of their community's agricultural history. And so they decided what better way than to create a giant ball of popcorn. And so in April of 1995, with the help of Cedar Creek Popcorn Company, they created their first attempt at the world's largest popcorn ball. And that particular ball was about 2,200 pounds. So a good amount of popcorn. But pretty quickly later that year, there were some Boy Scouts in La Crosse, Wisconsin, who created an even bigger popcorn ball as part of a Boy Scout jamboree. And so their record was busted, and they needed to figure out, what to do with this existing popcorn ball. And so originally, someone had suggested, maybe we could feed it to livestock. This is, a real popcorn ball like you would make at the holidays, and so, after it had sat around for a bit over the summer, it had gotten pretty congealed, and so that wasn't an option. Someone suggested just taking it to the dump, but it was a pretty large piece to just sort of dispose of. And so they got the idea that they would take this popcorn ball to the county fairgrounds. And during the county fair, in between grandstand acts, they would load it up with dynamite and explode it as sort of a sideshow attraction. I think the idea was that, popcorn would rain from the sky as they threw this plunger. That was not what happened. In fact, it was so congealed and so solid that when they threw the plunger to explode the dynamite that had been loaded into this ball, it flew up into the air and then broke down into just a couple of pieces. So it did not go the way that they had planned and made them realize that they needed to get a little bit more creative with their means of disposing of these big popcorn balls. And they would have to because they created both a second and a third world's largest popcorn ball that were both also beat before creating this popcorn ball in June of 2016 as their fourth attempt to hold the world record. And since then, next year will be a decade of the world's largest popcorn ball in Sac City. No one has come close to their record. And with good reason, because this popcorn ball measures about 12 feet in diameter and weighs 9,370 pounds. So almost four times as much as that original ball. Truly, truly a lot of popcorn. And you can see in this photo here, they got permission from Guinness World Records to create almost like a a plastic mold for the popcorn ball to be formed in, because at that size and that weight, it would be too heavy. It would just kind of collapse on itself. So you can kind of see in that photo, there's a blue bunting that runs around the top of that plastic mold, and then over the top of that, you can kind of see the mounding popcorn. But every time Sac City has created these popcorn balls, it has been a real community event. And so they have come together, um, requested volunteers, taken community help to sort of almost like grape stomping, get inside this mold and smush down the popcorn so that it's one compact popcorn ball mass. And just has had a really fun time with it. You can see sort of toward the bottom of this photo. Um, the world's largest popcorn ball is on display 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in the center of Sac City. It's actually attached to their historical museum complex. So if you visit the museum in Sac City, the popcorn ball is right there. But there are windows on three sides, so you can peek at it, rain or shine, summer or winter. But they also have a lot of really great photos of locals creating this popcorn ball, but also creating some of the other popcorn balls over the years. So just a really, really fun, and kind of kooky way for Sac City to pay tribute to such a unique part of its history. And yeah, they haven't had to figure out how to dispose of this one, which I'm sure would be a feat in and of itself after the others. One of the other things that when folks ask, like, what's the grossest or the weirdest thing that's featured in the book? Another one is the world's largest Cheeto, which you can find in Algona, Iowa, up in the northern part of the state. And this is, I always like to talk about world's largest things. There are kind of two categories of them. There are world's largest things that are the actual thing. So the actual world's largest popcorn ball, the actual world's largest Cheeto. And then you also have world's largest things like the ones featured on the cover of my book, Albert, the world's largest bull, not an actual bull, a sculpture, the world's largest strawberry, and then the world's largest coffee pot in Stanton. Um, so these two are actually two that are the real physical thing. The world's largest Cheeto is in fact a just a giant Cheeto snack. As you can see, it is a little bit, it's showing its age. It was found by a man by the name of Mike Evans in 2003. So it is a 22-year-old Cheeto at this point. Um, and he was a US Navy officer who was stationed on a base in Hawaii and was enjoying his afternoon snack and happened to find this Cheeto in a bag of Cheetos that he was eating. And he was really impressed by its size. And this was also kind of the 2002, 2003 era where folks were listing things on eBay. Like, the slice of toast with Jesus's face toasted into it and things like that. And so he was like, man, I bet I could make a buck off of this. And so he listed the giant Cheeto on eBay, and it garnered a bunch of media attention. And one of the people that it got the attention of was a radio DJ based in Algona, Iowa. And he saw the Cheeto and he thought, man, what a cool, great thing. How awesome would that be to have this giant Cheeto for our community? And so he started a campaign to bring the big Cheeto to Algona and started fundraising. In the meantime, the eBay auction that Mike Evans had put up reaches more than $1 million for the Cheeto. There is tons of bidding for it. And ultimately, eBay shuts the auction down because they don't allow food to be sold on their platform. And so no one earns the title of the owner of the world's largest Cheeto from that auction. But Mike Evans had seen the campaign that this man in Algona had started. And so he reached out and he said, you know what? Keep your money. They had raised a couple $100s, donate it to the local food bank. I will send you the world's largest Cheeto. It can be yours. And so he sends the Cheeto to Iowa. And it is about like zero point 0.6 ounces. So it's silver dollar size. It's certainly bigger than a standard Cheeto that you would be eating. But they received the Cheeto. and it doesn't have a permanent home for a while. It kind of bops around town. At one point, the Cheeto rides on a float in a local parade, and ultimately, it ends up at a restaurant called Sister Sarah's. Unfortunately, that restaurant closes, but a new couple purchases the building and the restaurant equipment, and unknowingly at the time, also purchases the world's largest Cheeto along with all of this restaurant equipment. And so today you can find the world's largest Cheeto at Emerald's Fine Food and Libations in Algona. And it sits on, you can see here, a kind of orange blown glass pedestal atop this purple velvet pillow. And it has sort of a Beauty and the Beast style cloche on top of it. To keep it protected, there's lots of, if you're a real fan of this one, there's lots of funny stories and news articles about it. At one point, RAGBRAI had gone through Algona, and there's stories about, the owner talking about having to prevent people from trying to take a bite of it. Yeah, it's just a funny, silly one that I love to tell people about. And Emerald's is also, if you're in the area, a great place for dinner, for lunch. They have an excellent selection, and if you stop in, be sure to ask to see the Cheeto. It's kind of in a back hallway off their bar area. So worth a stop for two reasons. Another of the weird things that I really love to talk about um, is the Cardiff Giant in Fort Dodge. When I started working on this project, I had a pretty good list of places that I knew I wanted to consider including. But then I started asking people I knew had grown up here, who had lived in Iowa their entire lives, tourism folks I knew, other kind of local history folks that I knew, what some places and what some secrets would be that they thought would be good to include in this book. And so one of them that I found through that process was the Cardiff Giant. And the Cardiff Giant is one of America's most famous hoaxes. And so in the 1860s, there was a man by the name of George Hull, and he was from upstate New York originally, but he had a sister who lived in the Fort Dodge area. And George Hull was an entrepreneur. He had his hands in a variety of different businesses, but he came to visit family in Iowa, and at the time, uh, was kind of intrigued by these revivalist rallies that were happening in different parts of the country and in Iowa as well. And he saw all of these people who were being, taken in by stories of giants and ogres and mythical creatures that, once walked the earth in times of fire and brimstone. And so he saw this, and then he also was spending time in and around Fort Dodge. And if you know anything about Fort Dodge, or its topography, one of their main industries at the time and still was mining for this kind of sandy colored stone called gypsum. Gypsum looks like a sandstone, but it has an almost blue veining that runs through it. And George Hull saw that and he thought, it kind of looks like the blue coloring in the stone almost looks like veins underneath skin. And so he had those two experiences and he put them together and came to the conclusion naturally that how great would it be if he could find a mummified giant and showcase it as a sideshow that people would come see. George Hull was, like I said, an entrepreneur. And so he decided that, he was going to take that idea into his own hands and create his own mummified giant. And so in 1868, he purchases a 10-foot long slab of Fort Dodge gypsum weighing almost 3,000 pounds and can't tell anyone why he needs such a big slab of stone, but transports it from the Fort Dodge area first to Chicago, where he commissions an artist to carve the Cardiff Giant for him. And then again to upstate New York, where he's from, where in October of 1869, he pays a group of men who are digging a well on a farm to first bury the Cardiff Giant and then the next week to discover it. Um, a lot of effort. There's a lot of really great details from this story. There's actually someone has written a book just about the Cardiff Giant. And so, if this piques your interest, you can go learn about kind of all of the minutia of George Hull's journey to pull off this hoax. There's all sorts of stories since this was the 1860s of bridges breaking down and wagons failing and things like that because they weren't graded for this huge amount of weight that he was trying to transport all in one piece. And so he brings the sculpture back to upstate New York, pays to have these men bury it, and then discover it. And for all of the trouble that he goes through, George Hull was right. It is a huge success. People are coming by the hundreds and thousands to see the Cardiff Giant and paying 50 cents each to get in, to get a glimpse at it in 1869. So he is making great money from this endeavor that took him so long. And in fact, he is so successful that he catches the attention of P.T. Barnum, who tries to buy the Cardiff Giant from him for $50,000. George Hull declines. He knows that he's got a good thing going. And so P.T. Barnum says, that's fine. And he creates his own version of the Cardiff Giant. So there are then two Cardiff Giants touring the country as this real life mummified giant. And there's actually now a third Cardiff Giant because in the 1980s, the city of Fort Dodge decided that they wanted to find a way to pay tribute to this unique part of their history and to this Iowa connection. And so they commission a local artist to carve a third Cardiff Giant, also made out of Fort Dodge gypsum. That can reside in Fort Dodge and that people can come see and learn about the story. So today you can find this Cardiff Giant at the Fort Museum in Frontier Village in Fort Dodge. It is in a little like gazebo almost in the center of the fort. Um, and you can go in and see it is almost 10 feet long. This huge fake mummified giant. They also have a lot of really great vintage advertisements and photos from the Discovery site with men in top hats and just all sorts of kind of fun artifacts and memorabilia from the discovery and the promotion of the Cardiff Giant. But this is one I always love talking about for the like there's an Iowa connection in everything, which is something that I have learned and experienced, and I'm sure many of you have as well in your time living here. So yeah, some kind of fun and funky ones to get us started with. Um, Another thing that I really have loved working on this project and getting to talk about it is some of the wonderful things. And so there are just so many hidden gems and things in Iowa that I think, particularly for people that aren't from the state or just sort of see the Midwest as flyover country, maybe don't realize. And so getting to delve deeper into some of these things and getting to visit some places that had always been on my Iowa bucket list, but I hadn't had a chance to visit and experience yet, has been really, really fun. And so, one of those spots that we're going to talk about today is the historic Park Inn Hotel in Mason City. And so, this hotel is the only remaining Frank Lloyd Wright designed hotel in the entire world. And we have it here in northern Iowa. It is also a place that you can book and spend the night, which I always, particularly going into kind of the winter off season, always recommend as a cozy getaway. But this building is located right in the heart of downtown Mason City, right off of their main square and their town park. And so, really is sort of a centerpiece of the community now, but really wasn't always, and was in real danger of being torn down for a lot of its history. And so it was designed in 1909 and opened in 1910. Frank Lloyd Wright was responsible for the design of the building, but he wasn't necessarily responsible or on site for a lot of the construction of the project. If you know anything about Frank Lloyd Wright, he had a kind of tumultuous personal life that bled into some of his professional life. And so this was the point in time that he had moved to Europe, had burned a lot of professional bridges, but because of his style and influence. And because of this project, a lot of his contemporaries and a lot of his students actually ended up in the Mason City area doing this work and other work. And so, if you're an architecture fan, this is definitely a spot worth visiting. But Mason City in general has a really incredible um, kind of collection of prairie style architecture. It's actually the world's largest collection. Oh gosh, what is it? World's largest collection of prairie style homes on a unified site, which is just a fancy architecture way of saying that they have a lot of this style of buildings within one neighborhood. And so a lot of the folks that were involved in this project were commissioned to build homes or other buildings in the community for other prominent figures. And so there's a lot of really cool, kind of unexpected um, prairie style architecture in Mason City. And so this building opens in 1910. It is a hotel. In the center of the building, there's kind of a low point, and that was a law office at the time. The partners of the law firm were some of the local business people that were the ones that commissioned this project originally. And so there's a hotel, their offices in the middle, and then the opposite end of the building housed a bank. And so it has a really kind of beautiful jewel box bank feel to it. If you're familiar with any of the Lewis Sullivan banks, this one has some similar attributes. And so it opens in 1910, but really the life of this building as a hotel initially is really short lived. It's only open for about 16 years before the bank fails because of the farming crisis in 1926. And so after the bank fails, the law offices move out, and pretty quickly the property is foreclosed on. And so from there, it is split up into a bunch of different properties. Over the years, it was different storefronts in downtown Mason City. At one point, by the 1970s, the owner transitioned it into different kind of tenement style apartments. And by the 1990s, it was sitting completely vacant. And a lot of, the fixtures over the years had been stripped. A lot of the things that really made this building a gem were no longer there. And it was in real danger of being torn down because it had become such an eyesore and such a public safety hazard for the city. And so thankfully, that did not happen. There was a big community of folks in Mason City who felt really strongly that this was something that their community needed to protect and preserve. And so they came together along with some architects and some donors to do a lot of fundraising to be able to save and reopen the historic Park Inn Hotel. And so they undergo that effort. It ends up being a more than $18.5 million renovation. So a pretty sizable and costly project. They had a lot of restoring to do. They also had a lot of updating to do because originally, when this hotel opened, it included 43 10 by 10 hotel rooms with shared bathrooms in the hallways. They thought modern travelers probably wouldn't appreciate that lack of space or those shared amenities. And so they had to make some updates. They also obviously didn't need the law offices or the section that had been a bank anymore. And so when the property was renovated, they did keep the restaurant section. There are still two on property restaurants at the hotel, but they converted a lot of the space. And so it is now 27 unique hotel rooms. And so each, because of that, has a completely different layout, a completely different view, a completely different experience. And then the other side of the building, they converted into um, the main sort of section of the bank is now event space. And so they do a lot of meetings and weddings and that sort of thing. But the thing that I think is most special and interesting is that the group that kind of came together to save and preserve and renovate this building is a foundation called Right on the Park, like Frank Lloyd Wright. And they are a nonprofit foundation that is responsible kind of for the stewarding of the legacy of this building. They also offer tours. And even if you don't have the time to stay for the night at the hotel, I highly recommend a tour. It's definitely worth your time. You'll get to kind of tour the property and see in some different rooms and get to hear all about the renovation project, and they have some really just wild stories about how the community came together to bring so much of this original hotel back to some of the pieces that had been lost. Like there was a one of the architects on the project that was driving in neighboring Clear Lake and looked over and noticed that um, a garden fencing kind of looked like some of the metal grating that was on the outside of the building. And so he pulled over and he knocked on the door and said, "Hey, can you tell me about where you got this?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, I got it at a salvage yard." Well, come to find out, it had been stripped from the building originally, and they donated it back. Same with some of the art glass ceiling tiles that you can kind of see at the top of this photo. One of the foundation members was doing yoga at a friend's home nearby and looked up and noticed like, "Hey, is that skylight original?" And they said, "Oh no, I found it, at an antique mall and had it, put it up." Come to find out that it actually was originally designed and meant for the hotel, and so they donated it back. And they just have tons and tons of those types of stories. About this kind of really excellent community effort to come together and make sure that just over 100 years from when it first opened, the historic park and hotel reopened for visitors in 2011. So definitely worth a little winter road trip, winter getaway to Mason City to see and experience. They also offer, with the same foundation, a walking tour of the nearby neighborhood that has a whole bunch of prairie style homes and kind of other contemporaries of Frank Lloyd Wright that did work in the area. So if you really want to learn more there, and they also have the Stockman House in Mason City, which is another Frank Lloyd Wright designed home that you can tour and just kind of learn more about his influence on the area. But one that I think is really cool and really special, um, and so excellent to see a community rally around in such a big way. One of the other places that I love to tell folks about that they often have not been to or heard of unless they're from the area is the Traer Salt and Pepper Shaker Gallery. And so this collection is now open to the public um, and kind of a permanent fixture in the community of Traer. But it originally was the collection of one woman and lifelong Traer resident, Ruth Rasmussen, and she started collecting things, I think, like we all do. She was on vacation and she went to the Brookfield Zoo near Chicago and bought just a silver kind of souvenir salt and pepper shaker set and started collecting salt and pepper shaker sets wherever she would go. She and her husband traveled a lot. She had friends who traveled a lot. And so, pretty quickly, I think when your friends and family learn that you have an interest in something, that is what she started to receive for holidays, for birthdays. Anytime someone would go somewhere, they would bring her back a salt and pepper shaker set. And pretty quickly, her collection grew too big for her home. And so her husband built a little garden shed in their front yard that had floor to ceiling shelves that she could display her collection kind of 3 and 4 deep on each shelf. And she would put a little sign out in the yard that said open today. And folks in town would come by and chat with her and see what she had that was new and just kind of check out her collection. And pretty quickly, news about this spread through word of mouth, and people just kind of knew that Ruth had this collection and that you could go see her about it. And she, eventually ran out of space. And so they added a little annex to the salt and pepper shaker shed in her front yard. Um, but this was just a lifelong hobby for her. And she was approached a number of times over the years with folks who wanted to purchase her collection. She always declined. And as she started to get older, I think the city of Traer realized that this was something that people really valued and was really special to their community. And so they started to try to figure out how they could make plans to preserve her collection for generations to come. And so ultimately in 2008, they end up purchasing the entire collection from her. And when they do, they purchase more than 15,000 pairs of salt and pepper shakers. So 30,000 individual shakers. And one of the things that I think is most impressive about Ruth's collection is first that she had no duplicates. She was really meticulous about sort of the quality and maintenance of her collection, but she also kept really precise inventory of everything she had, which from someone with a library and museums background, I'm always so impressed by. But every time she would get a new salt and pepper shaker set, she would uh, take a recipe card and she would write down when she got it, where it came from, what the brand was, how much it cost. And then she would give it almost like its own Dewey Decimal number, and then also number the shaker on the bottom. And so when the city takes over this collection, they have a really, really complete catalog of absolutely everything that Ruth had in her collection. And so they end up opening a 22,000 square feet building just to display her collection. And you can see here they have this section set up like a little farmer's market with all of the fruit and veggie salt and pepper shakers. There's a 50s diner section. There is a room that is just cats and just dogs and holiday shakers. There is a US map. There are shakers from every state. Her collection really, really is special. And something really fun to get to see. There's also, because she had a sense of humor, a little PG-13 cabinet of some of the naughty salt and pepper shakers, which I always think is funny. Um, but just a really, really cool, impressive collection. All from one single person. Ruth turned 100 earlier this year and sadly also had passed away this spring, but it's really special to get to share about her collection with so many people and have people be able to come visit it for generations to come. This is one that's open seasonally. So it's getting toward the end of the season. I think they're open through November. But if you're up near Traer and have the time, I think it's $5 for adults and maybe just a dollar for kids. Really, really worth your time to pop in and check out her collection. It's one of those places that I have been a couple times and I notice different things every single time just because there are so many cool things to see there. So a special one for sure to check out. And then the last section of things that we're going to talk about is a couple obscure places. And these were the ones that were hardest to come up with just because I wanted to make sure that I had things that were good enough secrets in the book. And so there are some, like I mentioned in the intro, there's a secret about the Iowa State Fair in the book. I think if you know anything about Iowa, you probably know corn and the state fair, and so that is obviously not a secret to any of us. Um, but I wanted to kind of think about ways to showcase some things that people maybe didn't know about these more well-known places. And so for the Iowa State Fair, there is a secret about Baby Mine, who was the elephant that more than 15,000 children helped crowdfund for after the Great Depression. That, if you don't know that story, it's definitely one worth looking into. It's a very, very cool, interesting piece of state fair history, but trying to come up with some of the places that were a little bit more obscure, a little bit more off the beaten path, was really a fun challenge, and where some of those other recommendations from people I knew who grew up here and had lived here their whole lives. For places that they had that were just like, hey, there's this weird thing that I always used to drive by, but I have no idea why it's there. And so both of these are some of those places that I got to dig into the history of a little bit more and uncover some of those stories that otherwise folks, didn't have the origin of. And so this first one I also mentioned in the intro is the Great Pyramids of Avery. And so this is another story of an Iowan who had a passion and decided to create something unique because of it. And so the pyramids here were created by a man by the name of Axel Peterson. He was a former coal miner, and he also had been the longtime publisher of the small newspaper in the town of Avery, which is now kind of unincorporated over near Hickory Grove. And so in the 1930s, the late 1930s, he had retired. He was in his 70s, and he was an avid reader who had gotten really into Egyptology. And he particularly loved the Great Pyramids. And so he had done all this reading And he decided, you know what? I want to build my own version of the Great Pyramids of Giza. And so for $25, he purchases a little segment of land, kind of adjoining the Hickory Grove Cemetery. And he recruits some of his neighbors to help him because, like I said, he's in his 70s at this point, to create two smaller pyramids and then a third pyramid that you can see here, that actually is accessible and has kind of a room inside of it that stands about 15 feet tall. And so you can kind of see also, obviously, they have aged some, but they're also a little bit askew. They're not sort of a totally symmetrical triangle. And that is because he and his neighbors used an upside down bed of a pickup truck to create the walls and sort of flip them up to be able to make these structures. But he constructs these two sculptural pyramids and then this third pyramid as a tomb. And his vision is that he and his friend, who he published the newspaper with when they passed, would be entombed together, seated upright with their printing press in between them. I can tell you now that is not what happened. I wasn't able to find if it was a family decision, if, because he wasn't actually on cemetery property, he was just kind of next to it, that was a thing that wasn't allowed by the county or sort of what happened there. But he is buried in a more traditional plot in a cemetery nearby. But these pyramids, more than 100 years later, or almost 100 years later, are still standing. And they are, if you're on kind of the rural road that goes by here, it is really kind of surprising to see just sort of out of nowhere these 15-foot tall pyramids just sort of pop up out of the corner of your eye. And so this was a really fun one to get to be able to do a little historical research and delve into and see sort of where they came from. And then the last place we're going to talk about today is in Carroll, Iowa. And it is why there is a Los Angeles Lakers themed basketball court in Carroll. This was another one that a friend had mentioned. She grew up in the area and was like, I have no idea why this basketball court is here in these colors. They're not our school colors. They're not, any of the area college colors. Like, why is this here? And so before the Los Angeles Lakers were based in California, they were based in Minneapolis. That's where their name comes from, is the Minneapolis Lakers. And so in January of 1960, they had been playing a day game in St. Louis, and they're headed back to the Twin Cities that evening. But pretty shortly after takeoff, it's a smaller plane with two pilots, the team, and their staff. Pretty soon after takeoff, they encounter a snowstorm and they lose both power and radio connection. And so they have no lights and they also have no way to radio the surrounding towers. And so they continue flying. And by about 1:30 in the morning, they know most certainly, when they have not reached Minneapolis yet, that they are lost. And so they are running out of fuel. It's the middle of the night. And they start to kind of slowly descend to buzz to see if they can find a place to make a safe emergency landing. And one of the pilots actually has written a memoir. He had a really long flight career before this and after this, and has written a memoir where he talks about being so close to the ground that they could actually read the billboards and could see kind of the letters on the water tower. And so they're kind of skimming really low to the outskirts of the town of Carroll. And actually, now that Carroll has grown, this basketball court is pretty close to where they end up ultimately making an emergency landing in the cornfield. Miraculously, they are all uninjured. They make a completely safe emergency landing in the field. And when they emerge, not only is there a line of first responders already, but there's also a big line of cars of locals from the town with blankets and food and water, who have been awoken in the night by this really low flying plane and came out just to make sure that anyone who was aboard was okay. And so on the 60th anniversary in 2010, the LA Lakers donate $25,000 to the city of Carroll to commemorate what they call the Miracle Cornfield Landing and say thank you to the town for their care and hospitality and all of those years ago. And of course, with the stipulation that it be LA Lakers branded colors. And so just a really kind of fun piece of local history that is around you every day potentially that you may not have known to look for. So um, that is just a taste of some of the 84 places that are in the book. If you have any questions, I know Andrew has been compiling them. We've got a couple minutes still. But yeah, it was a really, really fun one to put together and really hard to narrow down to just 84 spots because there are so many cool things all over the state. I will say one of the big challenges was having to have them attached to a physical place that you could still go to. There were a couple of places or historical stories that I really wanted to include that just didn't have a good, reliable place that you could still visit. Um, there also were a couple of times where there were ways that I got around that. And so one of them is in Sioux City. Um, a lot of people, I think, know about the world's largest corn palace in Mitchell, South Dakota. But Sioux City was actually creating corn palaces way before Mitchell started theirs. And so, at kind of the turn of the century, there are these really cool corn palaces being created that were costing, millions of dollars at the time to celebrate the harvest. And obviously, those structures don't exist anymore. They were very ephemeral. But finding a way to still be able to talk about them and include them in the book was a fun challenge. And it turned out that the Public Museum in Sioux City actually has a permanent exhibit about the corn palaces that you can go see. So that was kind of a fun way to get around some of the challenges of that parameter. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to send them in to Andrew, and we have a little bit of time to answer them.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Megan. This was
Yeah.
super fun. We do have time. We've got about 14 minutes for some questions. As a reminder, get those put into the Q&A. We've already got some coming in, but we should have time to get to quite a few of them. So feel free to get those in so we can get them on ready to go here. We may not get to them all, but we'll do our best. So our first question, and this came up really early, so we're going back to Sac City. But the first question is, how did they dispose of um, popcorn balls number 2 and 3? You know,
Such a good question. So they have tried a number of different things. I know I had the pleasure of chatting with their longtime tourism person quite a few times about this, and she was like, you never could have told me that my so much of my career would include like having to figure out logistics like this, which is so silly." But the most recent one, so the third one, I'm not sure about the second, but the third one, I do know that they ended up needing to use um, like a small bulldozer and then also the jaws of life from the fire department to kind of tear it into smaller, more manageable pieces so they were able to move it. Because that one was also in a garden shed, but just a little bit smaller of a shed that only had like a front window instead of the three-sided. So, but yeah, it had also sat there for quite a bit without climate control. So you can imagine it was sticky and hard.
yeah, what do you do with the second largest popcorn ball in the world, right?
Exactly.
You've
Yeah,
got to.
tough to keep around.
Yeah, anyway, I've driven by this many times. I take Highway 20 to see my parents
Yes.
of home, and I see the sign for the popcorn ball all the time. Another great question here is, what was the genesis of this project? How did this come about for you?
Yeah, so like we mentioned at the top, I'm a freelance writer. I do a lot of writing for different publications, a lot of writing for different kind of destinations, and then I do some of my own work as well. And so I got connected with someone from the publisher of this book, which is Reedy Press, and they have a couple of different kind of local travel series that they publish. And so one of them you might have seen out in the world is like the 100 things to do in insert place before you die. There's one for Iowa, there's one for Des Moines. And so we had been talking about one of those titles, but they had just kind of recently launched this secret series. And I love a road trip. I love a weird roadside attraction and a giant thing. And so I approached them and said, "Hey, I think that actually one of these titles, if you don't have an Iowa one already, would be really, really great." And so getting to, yeah, kind of jump on that and be a part of a series that they were launching was really fun. The first book I wrote, Iowa Supper Clubs, is kind of like a standalone. And so I was really in charge of like the format and the kind of the length and how all of that worked. And so this was kind of a fun exercise in not being in charge of some of those things.
Interesting. That's great. Wonderful. Another question here is, what was the most difficult site to
Ooh.
find out information on?
That is a good question. So, for my first book, I had to do because it was a lot of historical, like supper club research about things that are now gone. Um, that one I had to do a lot of newspapers.com and a lot of like Facebook groups and a lot of like, Wayback Machine for websites that don't exist anymore. This one was a little bit easier because the places all had to still be tied to a physical location you could still visit. And so they were a little bit more updated. There were still a couple that were, like the Van Meter Visitor is included in the book, and if you're not familiar with the story of the Van Meter Visitor, it is Iowa's, own cryptid, so, like, our own Iowan Bigfoot, and so that one is a story from the 1800s that still has, kind of fun life today, and so that one, obviously from, like, a folklore perspective, is a little bit harder to find info on. Thankfully, we have some really, really passionate and engaged Midwest folklorists who talk a lot about kind of Midwest monsters and some of those legends. And so I was able to tap them and use some of the imagery that they have from projects. I will say, just generally, one of the other hardest parts about this book was that I was responsible not only for all of the writing, but I also had to source all of the imagery. And for all 84 of the entries, they all have 1 to 2 photos at least. And so that was just a really big undertaking as well. And so a lot of the photos in the book are ones that I took, but I also worked with some really great photographers I know who do, more drone photography and things like that. There was just a couple places. Um, like the Kate Shelley High Bridge up near Ames, in Boone, that lended itself a lot better to having some cool aerial photos versus, like, my photo from the ground. And then some places too where, there was historical photos that I was able to use, actually from the State Historical Museum, who was really wonderful and helpful, for places, like the Buxton Historic Town Site and things like that, that maybe have a historic marker, but aren't that interesting to look at from like a book visual perspective.
Perfect. This is a great question too. What was the or what was a surprising thing you learned when writing this book?
Ooh, a surprising thing. I honestly, I think one of the most surprising things has been just in getting to like share it and talk about it with folks is how like locally, people will really, like, champion their town's kind of weird, unique thing, but even, like, a town over, uh, folks will be like, "Oh, yeah, I have no idea about that. I've never heard of that." And so getting to, um, be sort of the auxiliary champion for some of those things and share, some of those places with people that maybe, have lived just down the road and drive by it all the time or have never stopped or think that there's no reason that anyone would be coming to visit their little town for from a tourist perspective. That has been kind of fun and surprising. It's also just been really fun to find so many other folks that love weird, big roadside attractions because that's my personal favorite. And so hearing people say, especially around the holidays, I'll have folks that say, that they are, buying it for a friend or a relative so that they have to go places with them, or that they leave it in their glove box so that if they're traveling, they can kind of pull out the index and see if there's anything close by. That's been a really fun part of it being out in the world.
Right. Great. This is a really interesting question. Were there any sites where you met resistance and couldn't use it
Ooh.
for publication?
Um, I don't know that it was necessarily resistance. There were a couple places that were sort of like on private property that are like technically visible, but aren't like I'm thinking of up kind of near Ames. There's like a really intricate treehouse that a man has built as a tribute to one of his children, but he doesn't necessarily want visitors there. And so when I was crowdsourcing ideas, there was sometimes places like that where there would be things that people were like, "Hey, this is this really cool thing," but it's not necessarily like a place that I would want to put in print, like, "Hey, go here," because it's not like a publicly open attraction or something that you can go see kind of readily with regularity, if that makes sense. Um, I don't know that there were any others. I especially with my first book because it's all based on restaurants, that was always one where I was like, "Oh gosh, like, a lot of these places, like, if you put them in here, are they gonna close?" I've gotten pretty lucky there. This one I have also gotten pretty lucky that this came out, late 2023, that there are all still places that you can go visit.
That's great. Another question here is, are there any sites you've learned about since publishing that you would want to include if you were writing it again a couple of years later?
Yes, yeah. I feel like every time I do a book event or a presentation or talk about this to anybody, they'll be like, "Have you heard about this place?" And I'm always like, "No, that should definitely be in there." There is oh gosh, I'm gonna forget what it's called now, but there is like a miniature spoon museum that opened in Muscatine. Um, I think it's in Muscatine, somewhere near the Quad Cities. After this came out, that one is kind of fun and wild. There is a place up in northern Iowa, in Northwood, called Art Farm. That is like a century farm that they are converting into like a public art space and an art gallery. And they are doing some really, really cool, interesting things. They had an artist um, from England named Lucy Sparrow, who's like an internationally renowned artist who does felt sculpture, come this summer, and she made the world's largest can of felted spam. So there's tons and tons of places that I'm like, oh man, I could fill an entire second 84 list and then probably some of places you could go see around the state.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking about things like from where I grew up. Like, I don't know if they're on like Santa's Castle in Storm Lake is,
Yes, yeah.
like a really uh, the deep dive stone kind of thing. So another question, this one's mine and full disclosure. Did you chase any false trails in your search, or did you hear of
Ooh.
something and go looking for it and you couldn't find it? Does
Yeah,
that
there
question
were
make
a
sense?
couple. Yes, yeah, there were a couple that were like, there used to be, oh gosh, even forget where it was, but there used to be a two-story outhouse somewhere, that someone had told me about. That one I think no longer exists. There were a couple places like that, or I would do like I have like probably every old like weird Iowa travel guide from like the 70s, 80s on. And just like when there would be like Planned Parenthood book sale or any of those kind of big book sales that have a lot of those old books, they'd always come home with me. And so I did a lot of flipping through those. And there was sometimes things that I was like, does this still exist? And they don't, or things, even things that I was like taking photos of at the time, like up in Ida Grove, some of the castles that are around town. There were quite a few of those buildings that were for sale, like the newspaper building. Um, at the time, and so they weren't sure, is whoever buys this building gonna want it to look like a castle? Will they still exist? So there was definitely times like that. Or like driving. There's one, oh gosh, and I'm blanking on where it is, but up in Northwest Iowa where there was a meteor that hit,
Hmm.
and there's like a section of it, but it gets like moved around town, and there was road construction. So there's always things like that that you're like, I think I found this, but I'm not quite sure.
Hmm.
Um, And so some of the photos, I was like, I'm just going to email someone and ask because, you know, I can see it through this like super reflective window, but the photos that I can get of it aren't going to be as great as some of the, historical images to share. But
Yeah.
yes, always a bit of a goose chase
Yeah, I think it's like probably part of the fun, like
for
in
sure.
a project like this. We've got just a minute left, and so with that, I'm going to ask one more quick question that I ask to everyone, and before we wrap up, which is, what are you working on now? I know you do freelance, so probably have lots of projects, but for our
Yes.
audience, what are you working on?
Yeah, so I'll flip to this one too. I am working on, yeah, a lot of fun freelance stuff. I also am working on a kind of interactive passport about world's largest things. And so, kind of like they have the National Parks passport, where you can get a little stamp or a sticker when you visit a world's largest thing. I'm working on kind of a Midwest version of that. I have the Iowa section on my website currently to download, but as a kind of more of a passion project than an official book project, and that's been really, really fun.
That's great. Perfect. Well,
Yeah.
I want to say thank you again to you, Megan, for being here. With that answer, that brings us to a close. It was really wonderful to have you here, Megan. And I hope everyone will sign up for future Iowa History 101 webinars that take place throughout the year. There's so many great stories and places and things to explore in the upcoming months. For more information and to register for future webinars in this series or to watch recordings, check out our website at history.iowa.gov. If you're looking to learn more Iowa history, you can find and watch over 120 recorded webinars from our past 101 programs, including one on Iowa Supper Clubs that Megan did for us. And that's all on our Iowa History YouTube channel. We look forward to seeing you virtually for our next Iowa History 101 webinar on November 13th. The topic will be Amelia Bloomer, journalist, suffragist, and anti-fashion icon. Thank you all again for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.